Whoa. Hopefully you can hear me. If you can't hear me, let me know if my mouth is just moving randomly. Type that in the chat, please. Alright. Welcome to the Rhetoric Prof stream tonight. Oh, it sounds good. Good. They made an update, I think, to gonna have a fancy San Pellegrino for the stream. Hey, Steve. In order to OBS, which I use to stream, which like changes something about what I was used to. So I'm just glad that it's working, and I figured it out in time because I was busy being lazy. And tonight we're gonna read. Nice sponsor, yeah. Brought to you by Italia, San Pellegrino. Steve, I'm glad you're here because we were talking about readings to assign, and this is one that I've assigned for my first week. I'm doing this for a class on argumentation where I've created various kinds of alignments, and so for the lawful good week on the dialectician, this is the kind of dessert reading along with some pragma dialectic stuff. So I was asked to do this stream by some students. Why do humans reason? Arguments for an Argumentative Theory by Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber. Or Sperber, maybe. Which is a nice piece. And then they look and they're like, it's 55 pages long. Oh my god. So it's not, though, because it's mostly commentary. It's not too long of a piece, but we're going to work through it tonight. Maybe you can help me, because I actually have not read this piece. I looked it over again. I've read it a few times in my life, but I haven't read it closely in a while. So that's what we're going to do tonight, and maybe comment on it. So the abstract actually it's kind of interesting. It's a muscly abstract. Usually abstracts are kind of boring and abstract. Here they tell you exactly what they're going for. Reasoning is generally seen as a means to improve knowledge and make better decisions. However, much evidence shows that reasoning often leads to epistemic distortions and poor decisions. So what does that mean? When you reason about things, sometimes actually that means that you rationalize things. Your epistemic distortions are epistemic means knowledge. So distortions of knowledge and bad decisions come from reasoning. So we all kind of know this in our lives, that you can overthink stuff or whatever, various versions of that. So reasoning doesn't always make us more correct. What do we make of that? This suggests that the function of reasoning should be rethought. Our hypothesis is that the function of reasoning is argumentative. It is to devise and evaluate arguments intended to persuade. So when they say it is to devise and evaluate, what's the it here? It is reason itself. Reasoning so conceived is adaptive. When they say adaptive here, they mean in evolutionary terms. So they're trying to be like, why does reason evolve as a thing? And, that might be part of why something that I wonder about with this essay, which is reason actually a thing that evolved? Or is it a real complex of many different things that some of which might have an evolutionary history that's pretty clear, but some of which might be pretty contingent and historical and based in language that we have. But for the purpose of this reading, we're going to kind of adopt the idea that reasoning is a thing that humans have and do that has something to do with their biology. It's something to do with our brains. It's something we're capable of doing. An argument about, well, why would it exist in the first place? And these kind of arguments are very interesting. They're always hypothetical arguments that exist in biology. Darwin wrote a book on orchids after he wrote, I think it was pretty soon after he wrote on the origin of species, or was it the other one, on the descent of man? Whatever, it was one of those big books that he wrote that he's famous for. He wrote a book on orchids because orchids were the big craze. And there's this one orchid, don't ask me the name of it, but it had a really long stamen. And he predicted that there must be a moth that has a really long proboscis that would go into it. There would have to be an adaptive reason for the orchid to kind of have that structure. In the same way, we have this structure of reasoning. what's the thing out in the world that it's adapted to? That's kind of what they're trying to ask here. And so if I mean, we all kind of have heard these arguments before about evolution. Sometimes they can kind of be silly, but this one, there's a lot of evidence, so we're going to take a look at it. A wide range of evidence in psychology of reasoning and decision making can be reinterpreted and better explained in the light of this hypothesis. I should also say, if it's the first time to your stream or me doing this, one, why is it blacklight reading hour? I used to have a blacklight that I would do this with, but it was so old that I really would not be able to unplug it. It would just get stuck in the outlet. So I have to get a new blacklight. But also, feel free to chat and put things in the chat or questions you have, or play a game where you try to distract me. Whatever you want to do, we can talk. So it might be weird to be like, someone's reading, I don't want to interrupt them, but that's kind of the whole point of this. So don't feel like you're interrupting if you want to chat. I'm looking at the chat as I read. So, okay. Poor performance in standard reasoning tasks is explained by the lack of argumentative context. When the same problems are placed in proper argumentative settings, people turn out to be skilled arguers. Skilled arguers, however, are not after the truth, but after arguments supporting their view. So reason is not designed for truth. The backlight story is great. I say, keep this title. Yeah. I mean, I actually think I might go get a new one, but there's a lot of things I say that I don't do. This explains the notorious confirmation bias, the notorious confirmation bias. This is why I like their abstract. Like, they put a little bit of, they say it's notorious, like the notorious B.I.G. There's the notorious confirmation bias. Everyone's favorite rapper, confirmation bias, which is you look for evidence that supports the thing that you already believe. You look for arguments and reasoning that support what you believe. And they're like, that is not just like a fallacy of reason. That is the structure of reason. It's kind of wild. This bias is apparent not only when people are actually arguing, but also when they are reasoning proactively from the perspective of having to defend their opinions. Reasoning so motivated can distort evaluations and attitudes and allow erroneous beliefs to persist. Proactively used reasoning also favors decisions that are easy to justify, but not necessarily better. So, I mean, sometimes the thing that is the better argument isn't the one that's easier to make. But reason is kind of like, what's the quickest way down? Kind of like lightning will find the quickest path down. Reason's like, what's the quickest way from this to an argument? And it'll find it really good. It's really good at doing that. That may or may not have anything to do with truth in any given situation. Probably not. I mean, in all these instances, traditionally described as failures or flaws, reasoning does exactly what can be expected of an argumentative device. Look for arguments that support a given conclusion, and ceteris paribus, that means all things being equal, favor conclusions for which arguments can be found. Okay. So I think that's a pretty good abstract, actually. That's what made me want to assign the piece again. I read the abstract, I was like, okay, this is good. Inference, as the term is most commonly understood in psychology, so it's good that they tell you, like, they don't mean this in the everyday sense of inference. They mean it in the specific sense of social and cognitive psychology. Probably even more cognitive psychology, because where are we? We're in the behavioral and brain sciences journal. That's where we are, okay? Just so you know. Is the production of new mental representations on the basis of previously held representations. Yeah, page turner. What? Yeah, this may not be a page turner, but the conclusion might be. I wonder if you could do I like Bruce Fink, who's a Lacanian psychoanalyst. He writes detective stories from the point of view of Lacan. He explains Lacanian psychoanalysis as detective stories. I bet you could do the same thing for argumentation theory. That's kind of what I'm trying to do with the D&D characters. Like, can we make it more interesting? Because I think when people realize what's being said, it's kind of really fascinating and interesting. But, it's not necessarily, it's a page turner of a journal, right? Exactly. The piece is interesting. So why do they say here representations? Why are they being so abstract already? Well, because in the history, let's spend a little time here in the beginning. It might be really slow, but it'll get faster as we go, because this stuff in the beginning is important to work out. They're giving us the key terms. That's why they're italicizing it. Inference, reasoning. What do they mean when they say these things? They don't want to say ideas, because we have particular ideas about what ideas are. Representations might be anything. They might be, the way that the brain represents a smell or a number or It might be something like, it might be sense perception. It might be a memory. It might be so many different things. So how do I go from one to another? So let's say I smell onions and I'm like, oh, mom is cooking. The movement from one representation to another. One is a smell and another one is my thought or idea about it. That's inference. So it doesn't always have to be propositional. And that's one thing that's kind of nice about psychology in terms of argumentation theory, as opposed to philosophy, where we're already outside of a big thing that philosophers struggle with. Like, where are the sentences? It's like, well, we don't think exclusively in sentences. So that's why they're saying representations. It can be any of those things that a brain does, and moving between the different ones. Examples of inferences are the production of new beliefs on the basis of previous beliefs, the production of expectations on the basis of perceptions, or the production of plans on the basis of preferences and beliefs. So I'm like, oh, looks like it's raining. I guess I better wear a raincoat. That's the production of a plan. Be like, I see a dark cloud. Be like, oh, I'm going to bring my umbrella. It can be that simple. So understood, inference need not be deliberate or conscious, right? Like, we just do this stuff all the time, constantly. We're not even thinking about it when we're thinking. It is at work not only in conceptual thinking, but also in perception and in motor control. What does that mean? Just moving your body around. Like when you're walking down the street, you're doing all these high complex inferences when you're driving your car, but you're not thinking about it in the sense that we usually mean that, like talking to myself. It is a basic ingredient of any cognitive system. Reasoning, so they're making a distinction between inference and reasoning, as commonly understood, refers to a very special form of inference at the conceptual level, where not only is a new mental representation or conclusion consciously produced, but the previously held representations or premises that warrant it are also consciously entertained. So if I'm like, oh, mom's cooking, I might just be, I smell the onions. The reason I'm saying the onion things is because I just made onions and chicken, and so I'm smelling it right now. So there you go. That's me representing my representation to you. When I'm kind of driving and I'm like, ooh, I make that quick turn, that's not necessarily argumentative or reasoning. In reasoning, I'm saying, well, because there's a dark cloud, I should bring an umbrella. When I consciously represent those movements between the representations to myself, that's reasoning. So I'm aware of the things that are making me do it. Whereas what I do with my peripheral vision when I'm driving, which might be inferential, I'm not necessarily representing to myself. The premises are seen as providing reasons to accept the conclusion. Most work in psychology of reasoning is about reasoning so understood. Most such reasoning is typically human. Okay, if you say so. There is no evidence that it occurs in non-human animals or in pre-verbal children. So they have a footnote here. I'm not going to go through all the you can go look at the footnotes if you want to know. You want to get really into it. So how do humans reason? Why do they reason? These two questions are mutually relevant, since the mechanisms for reasoning should be adjusted to its function. So they're saying basically these two questions, you have to ask them together. How we reason and why we reason is the kind of the same question from their perspective. While the how question has been systematically investigated, for example, all these people, there is very little discussion of the why question. How come? It may be that the function of reasoning is considered too obvious to deserve much attention. It's like, of course we know why we reason. Let me know if it goes out of frame, because I also adjusted this. I can make this be a little bit easier to read along with me. But just remind me if it goes out of frame. Okay. In the first theoretical section of this article, we sketch a tentative answer to the how question, and then focus on the why question. We outline an approach to reasoning based on the idea that the primary function for which it evolved is the production and evaluation of arguments in communication. Boom. In sections 2 to 5, we consider some of the main themes and findings in the experimental literature on reasoning, and show our approach helps make better sense of much of the experimental evidence and hence gains empirical support from it. So that's what they're going to do. And I've been telling my students recently, we really shouldn't start reading from the beginning of stuff. We should look around in it. I'm not doing that right now because, I'm familiar with this piece. But just look at the subheadings of stuff and get a sense of a piece before you dive deep into it. And sometimes they'll even tell you, exactly what they're doing. So they told us here, but we're going to go through it in order because that's how I do it with this. 1. Reasoning, mechanism and function. Intuitive inference and argument. Since the 60s, much work in the psychology of reasoning has suggested that, in fact, humans reason rather poorly, failing at simple logical tasks, committing egregious mistakes in probabilistic reasoning, and being subject to sundry irrational biases in decision making. And they don't just mean that stupid people are bad at reasoning. Let's assume, as we always do when we get scientific facts reported to us, that they've controlled for that. No, everybody. Like, we're just kind of bad at reasoning. In general, when we set ourselves kind of these reasoning tests, people do badly. This work has led to a rethinking of the mechanisms for reasoning, but not, or at least not to the same degree, of its assumed function of enhancing human cognition and decision making. The most important development has been the emergence of dual process systems. So this is the Kahneman. They keep mentioning Kahneman here. And so this guy, he wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. And something else we'll read in the class when we get to our propaganda section is this kind of two systems thinking. Thinking fast and thinking slow based on these two systems. Okay, that's the idea. Sometimes we'd be like, oh yeah, we go with our gut on things. If we do slow thinking, we actually do different kind of thinking. All right. The most important development has been the emergence of the dual process systems, or System 1 and System 2 reasoning. Here we outline our dual process approach. We contend in particular that the arguments used in reasoning are the output of a mechanism of intuitive inference. Okay, whatever. A process of inference is a process. That's good to know. A process of inference is a process. The representational output of which necessarily or probabilistically follows from its representational input. So, why are they going about saying this? When you make an inference, that you make an inference is true. Whether the inference is a good one or not is a different question, but you've made it. Okay. The function of an inferential process is to augment and correct the information available to cognitive system. To one's cognitive system, maybe. An evolutionary approach suggests that the inferential processes, rather than being based on a single inferential mechanism or constituting a single integrated system, are much more likely to be performed by a variety of domain-specific mechanisms, each attuned to the specific demands and affordances of its domain. So people used to be like, thinking, Aristotle was like, nous, dianoia. When one thinks, this is what happens, as if there's like one thing happening. But even in the obvious examples I'm giving of, like, I'm looking at a cloud and seeing that it is dark, and I then think, oh, it might rain. There's my perceptual system, there's my memory system, there's probably my vestibular system of looking up and down. There's so many different things that are operating in our bodies, in our brains, in our minds to make these inferences. So trying to understand it as one single process is not going to work. Or I should say, is one single, mechanism. The inferential processes carried out by these mechanisms are unconscious. They are not mental acts that individuals decide to perform, but processes that take place inside their brain at a subpersonal level. So when you're walking around in an environment you've never been in, you don't kind of like first send out a bunch of radar signals to find what the environment's like. You adapt as you go. And you do that unconsciously. People may be aware of having reached a certain conclusion. Beware, that is, of the output of an inferential process, putting my foot down as I'm walking. But we claim that they are never aware of the process itself. I mean, this is actually kind of easy to do. If you do something kind of that you normally do, like walking or breathing or maybe playing an instrument, and you're like, and now I'm going to represent to myself how I do this. You're going to not be able to do it. You're going to very quickly inhibit yourself. It's a very weird thing that will happen. They generate, all inferences carried out by inferential mechanisms are in this sense intuitive. They generate intuitive beliefs, that is, beliefs held without awareness of reasons to hold them. It's just kind of what I think. So that's what the movement they're making here is that to call all of that stuff beliefs, I'm using the kind of motor system ones because I think that's easiest to understand. But just the perceptual ones, where I'm just kind of looking around, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a candle on the table. But it might be wrong. And I'm not thinking to myself that's a candle on the table. Like, I'm just seeing a candle on the table. So that is an intuitive belief I have. And I might kind of look later and be like, oh my gosh, that's not a candle at all. That's like a weird can of something. So that's what they mean when they're talking about intuitive beliefs. These are not the things that are coming from reasoning. The claim that all inferential processes carried out by specialized inferential mechanisms are unconscious and result in intuitive inferences may seem to contradict the common experience of forming a belief, because one is reflected on reasons to accept it. And not only, okay, let's see how we're going to do this. Am I going to move it over each time? That might be the best way to do it, Yeah. Because of its intuitive force. Such beliefs, held with awareness of one's reason to hold them, are better described not as intuitive, but as reflective beliefs. Our consciously held reason for accepting a reflective belief may be trusted in its source. The professor, the doctor, the priest. Well, my English teacher told me that metaphors and similes, is it really that reflective? Our reasons may also have to do with the content of the belief. We realize, for example, that it would be inconsistent on our part to hold to our previous beliefs and not accept some given new claim. Far from denying that we may arrive at a belief through reflecting on our reasons to accept it, we see this as reasoning proper, the main topic of this article. What characterizes reasoning proper is indeed awareness not just of a conclusion, but of an argument that justifies accepting that conclusion. We suggest, however, that arguments exploited in reasoning are the output of an intuitive inferential mechanism. So if you're in my class, you might be like, okay, well, this is what a long way around to get to the kind of basic thing. Well, in different kinds of contexts, people with different audiences, which we talked about last week in this class, here, making this distinction between the kind of beliefs that we get through reasoning and through inference is going to be really important, because in psychology, it's not obvious that we would begin with the ones that are just the kind of consciously represented ones. So they have to kind of make their point very clearly. However, these intuitive conclusions are about arguments. That is, about representations of relationships between premises and conclusions. The intuitive inferences made by humans are not only about ordinary objects and events in the world. They can also be about representations of such objects or events, or even about higher order representations of representations. Be like, well, of course numbers aren't real. It'd be obvious to you, or something like that. I don't know. The capacity to represent representations and to draw inferences about them is a meta-representational capacity with formal properties relevant to the mental computations involved. Several mental mechanisms use this meta-representational capacity. In particular, humans have a mechanism for representing mental representations and for drawing intuitive inferences about them. So I don't just represent to myself, I'm like, oh, I have a perception, I have that. I can also be like, oh, I am perceiving this. I can represent to myself that I am doing it. Be like, oh, yeah, I am smelling onions. That is what I'm smelling. I can do that. And that's maybe unique to human beings. This theory of mind mechanism is essential to our understanding of others and of ourselves. Humans also have a mechanism for representing verbal representations and for drawing intuitive inferences about them. This pragmatic mechanism is essential to our understanding of communicated meaning in context. We want to argue that there is yet another intuitive meta-representational mechanism, a mechanism for representing possible reasons to accept a conclusion. That is, for representing arguments and for evaluating their strength. And you can see where they're going there. What's this intuitive meta-representational mechanism? That's going to be a reason, right? Arguments should be sharply distinguished from inferences. An inference is a process the output of which is a representation. An argument is a complex representation. Both an inference and an argument have what can be called a conclusion. So, we do something at the end of an inference sometimes. We also think something. It could be lots of different things. But in the case of an inference, the conclusion is the output of the inference. In the case of an argument, the conclusion is a part, typically the last part, of the representation. The output of an inference can be called a conclusion because what characterizes an inferential process is that its output is justified by its input. So somebody's kind of coming into traffic and I swerve. That's the conclusion of the inference. That's perceptual. But an argument being like, that person should have their license revoked because they clearly don't know how to follow the traffic laws. The conclusion is that person should have their license revoked, even though that's the first thing that I've represented to myself. Okay. The way, however, in which the input justifies the output is not represented in the output of an intuitive inference. What makes the conclusion of an argument a conclusion, rather than simply a proposition, is that the reasons for drawing the conclusion on the basis of the premises are at least partially spelled out. It's that I say why it should be. It's the basic idea of argument. As Gilbert Harman has justly argued, it is a common but costly mistake to confuse the causally and temporally related steps of an inference with the logically related steps of an argument. So that's the big idea here, is that when we're talking about inference, they're talking about a causal process. There we go. Talking about a causal process. Arguments are not causally related to each other. They're logically, or actually, it's kind of hard to say. That's why it's hard for them to say, because it's not obviously true that it's logic. It might not be logic in the normative sense that you want it to be. But they're related to each other in this thing that we're calling reason. These reasons are related to each other. The causal steps of an inference need not recapitulate the logical step of any argument for it to be an inference. And the logical step of an argument need not be followed in any inference for it to be an argument. Sometimes the reason that you believe something, even though if you have an argument about it, that may not be the actual reason that you believe it. You know, if you're going to zoom back in on your life, if there was a camera of all of your thinking that could tell us exactly what you thought, you might have thought that for a totally different reason. But when you represent your belief to yourself, you're like, well, I believe it because here are the reasons why. Descartes' famous cogito argument, I think therefore I am, illustrates the manner in which an argument can be the output of an intuitive inference. Most people believe intuitively that they exist. Good for them. And are not looking for a reason to justify this belief. But should you look for such reasons, that is, should you take a reflective stance toward the proposition that you exist, Descartes' argument would probably convince you. It is intuitively evident that the fact that you are thinking is a good enough reason to accept that you exist. I'm not sure I agree. Or in other terms, that it would be inconsistent to assert I think and to deny I am. What is not at all obvious in this particular case are the reasons for accepting that this intuitively good argument is truly a good argument. Now, philosophers have been hotly debating the issue. So, whether it's a good argument or not, hard to say. Harder to say that people will be like, I'm thinking, I am something. I don't think that's a great example, honestly. I don't like this example. They're like, this is a good one. They might be a little too French for their own good here. The French love to talk about Descartes. As simple as the cogito or more complex, all arguments must ultimately be grounded in intuitive judgments, that given conclusions follow from given premises. Now, this is actually helpful, because when you go back to philosophical accounts of argumentation, or even rhetorical accounts of argumentation, what makes something a reason can be you can have a circular, it can go into an infinite regress problem. Where you're like, well, the reasons for something also need reasons, and those reasons need reasons. And you're like, wait, how would it ever stop? And they're like, well, it stops because of the actual way that we make intuitive judgments in the world. That's what those are all based in. That's not what arguments are, but it is what they are based in. That's kind of helpful, I think. In other words, we are suggesting that arguments are not the output of a system 2 mechanism for explicit reasoning. I'm pretty sure system 2 is the slow thinking, not the fast thinking. That would be a standing apart from, and in symmetrical contrast to, system 1 mechanism for intuitive inference. Yeah, system 1 is the fast thinking. So they're saying, no, arguments aren't slow thinking. That isn't what they are. It's not another inferential system. It's a different thing. It's about representing. Rather, arguments are the output of one mechanism of intuitive inference, among many that delivers intuitions about premise-conclusion relationships. Intuitions about arguments have an evaluative component. Some arguments are seen as strong, others as weak. Moreover, there may be competing arguments for opposite conclusions, and we may intuitively prefer one to another. These evaluations and preferences are ultimately grounded in intuition. If we accept a conclusion because of an argument in its favor that is intuitively strong enough, this acceptance is an epistemic decision. Again, this word epistemic just means related to knowledge. It's going to come up a lot in stuff that I read on this channel this term, probably. If we construct a complex argument... Oh, someone asked about this acceptance is epistemic decision that we take at a personal level. What do they mean by personal level here? They're like, do they mean does it affect your personal life? Probably not. I think they mean it in just a more normal pedestrian sense of it's something I'm doing by myself. If we construct a complex argument by linking argumentative steps, each of which we see as having sufficient intuitive strength, this is a personal level mental action. If we verbally produce the argument so that others will see its intuitive force and will accept its conclusion, it is a public action that we consciously undertake. Okay, so this is a long way around saying the arguments that we make to ourselves are different, probably, in lots of cases than the ones we would make to somebody else. I might accept an argument personally for reasons that I know other people wouldn't accept it, because I'm just like, that's just my experience. And my experience could be a reason I represent to myself in an argument. Be like, I have experience of that. But I can't necessarily say that in public, because I know people won't accept that. So they're making that distinction. I think that's how I'm interpreting it. You let me know what you think. What they might mean. The mental action of working out a convincing argument, the public action of verbally producing this argument so others will be convinced by it, and the mental action of evaluating and accepting the conclusion of an argument produced by others correspond to what is commonly and traditionally meant by reasoning, a term that can refer to either a mental or verbal activity. So like the whole thing, thinking it, saying it, evaluating it, the whole thing, which are all three different things, are all called reasoning. Why should the reflective exploitation of one mechanism for intuitive inference among many stand out as so important that it has been seen as what distinguishes humans from beasts? We are the rational animal. Sort of. That's maybe a bad translation of what Aristotle said, but whatever. Why, in dual process theories of reasoning, should it be contrasted on its own with all the mechanisms for intuitive inference taken together? We see three complementary explanations for the saliency of reasoning. First, when we reason, we know what we are reasoning, whereas the very existence of intuitive inference was seen as controversial in philosophy before its discovery in cognitive science. It's funny to think that it was controversial. I mean, this tells you something about philosophy. A lot of people will be like, someone said to me recently, like, this. I was like, how's the class going for you? You know, you've got good things to say. You know, how do you feel about it? They're like, well, it seems a lot like philosophy. And I was like, yes, true. It seems like philosophy. Until you start hearing my attitudes towards philosophy. I'm like very down on it. Very critical of philosophy and philosophical thinking. And this is one of the reasons why. Because not all philosophy, but philosophy tends to be monologic. It tends to have difficulty kind of moving into another discourse and accepting its reasons. And therefore, things that are very obvious to like anyone who is alive, that, you know, we make intuitive inferences about stuff that we aren't consciously thinking about. You know, you like drive a car and you're like, oh my God. Then that's one thing. And they're like, but is that a real thing? Is that real, or must it not be consciously represented? They're like, well, no, it's obviously not. And we did experiments and we proved it. And they're like, oh, damn, okay. I get that a lot too. Some were calling it a philosophy class accidentally because it's about a lot of questions. Philosophy today isn't like that, but maybe it never was. Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, Steve. It's that sometimes people will get pissed off at me. I met with someone recently. She's not a student of mine, but we were talking about class, and she's like, your students probably want to throw things at you sometimes. I was like, why did you say that? I'm like, you're right, but why do you think that? She's like, well, because you keep answering questions with questions. I'm like, yeah, I know that sounds like a bad kind of Socrates thing, but sometimes that's the best answer. Because or sometimes it's not really an answer at all. It's like, I just don't know what you mean, or whatever. Like, we're just having a dialogue, and so like I'm curious what you mean by that, or. So yeah, I think it's that kind of thing of like questioning, but that is not what's going on in philosophy. And I even have some friends that are philosophers. I read this book about virtual reality by a famous philosopher, and it was very disappointing. He kept ending every chapter by proving again and again that virtual worlds are real. It's exhausting. It's like either that means the trivially obvious thing. Yeah. I know, it is kind of disappointing. Like, I know some really smart people who are in philosophy, and we'll have very interesting conversations. And then sometimes they'll still do the thing where I'm like, but why are you so insistent on the thing that we all would accept? They're like, but it's not philosophical until we do this boring, painful insistence. I'm like, okay, fine. That's why I guess that's why you have a different career path than I do. I don't have a concrete idea of what I think philosophy is. If you experience it, why not? Those are both good comments. I don't think anyone has a concrete idea of what philosophy is, much less philosophers. That's what will really kind of trip them up. Well, that's when they start asking you questions. He used syllogistic proof about it. It was annoying. If you experience it, why not? Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about experiencing it is like, one of the things about the stuff that they're talking about in this piece about inference and intuition is we experience a lot of stuff that we're not even aware of, which is kind of weird. I mean, that is a weird thing to realize. we experience a lot of things that we are not aware of. I'm reading this other book for a different class, which is a lot about the gramophone. And why is this relevant? Well, because people started recording their voices, and they started like realizing things about how people sounded and stuff that even though they heard it all before, until you like heard it back on a record and it was all there, because everyone represented it to themselves in words, what they were hearing as words. So that one of the weird experiments they would do is one guy would like speak into a gramophone nonsense words, and people on the other end would hear words, because they would interpret them as words. It'd be like, oh yeah, and then you could figure out what people were really thinking about. He's like, this one young man, every nonsense word I say, he translates into something about girls. It's like, okay, well, that's what he's thinking about. So we tend to kind of go into a certain representational system of our own experience, and there's all of this stuff that's happening that we're not conscious of because of that. And thank God, I don't want to be conscious of everything I'm experiencing, but it's probably good to remember that sometimes. Like, a lot of my own experience, I actually don't experience, And yeah, hey, what's up, Alan? And Mirza, welcome. Okay. So second, while an inferential mechanism that delivers intuitions about arguments is, strictly speaking, highly domain-specific, and here domain-specific could mean, for psychologists, like specific to a certain kind of perceptual system in the brain, to a specific kind of even physiological mechanism. That kind of reminds me of the thing where until photography became a thing, no one knew what they looked like face on. Yeah, pretty much, right? This is like one of the things that I like to remind people of about the myth of Narcissus, where people are like, oh, he fell in love with himself. Like, no, he didn't. He looked in the myth, he looks into the pond and he's like, that person is so beautiful. He misrecognizes himself. He doesn't recognize his reflection. He falls in love with his reflection. Totally different. Which I think would be good to remember about maybe that would be like both more helpful to know that that's what narcissism is like, and also maybe a little bit more generous towards people and ourselves when we recognize what narcissism is. We'd only see ourselves in mirrors which are reversed. Yeah. I mean, this might still be true. It makes me think of the selfie reference you made last class. Yeah. I'm like becoming obsessed with selfies. I'm always talking about selfies now, but I think for one thing is because all of this stuff about selfies is something that we all do all the time, but it also contains all of these kind of complex things about audience and technology. And so when we think about it for a second, it like does a lot of the work of the stuff that's hard to talk about, where it gets kind of naughty, even for me. But you've been teaching me a lot. Like, I learned what a 0.5 selfie was, and I don't know. I'm learning a lot about selfies. It's also because I had been one of those people who resisted taking selfies for a long time, and I'm trying to become less selfish and take more selfies. The arguments thus when we reason on the basis of these intuitions, we may come to conclusions in all theoretical and practical domains. In other words, even though inferences about arguments are domain-specific, as evolutionary psychologists would expect, they have domain-general consequences and provide a kind of virtual domain generality. So this is a little bit of technical, inside baseball stuff. We don't need to be worried too much about this. Third, as we will now argue, the very function of reasoning puts it on display in human communication. The grammar of selfies. You never know. Yes, I have listened to the long song #selfie because somebody else was told me to listen to it. And so I played it in class. But I feel like you could make a good playlist in the history of music about things that were really about selfies, but maybe before they had the word. That would be a good fun music project. When are people really? Because there's so many songs that are about there's a whole tradition, especially of European love poetry, that's really all about love as a selfie, that you see in the beloved an image of yourself, that you misrecognize. This is a huge thing. Okay, the function of reasoning. These are I like that they use sans serif and lowercase for these, because if these were in all capital letters, this would sound like a 19th century German monograph from an idealistic philosopher. The function of reasoning. They're like, no, just the function of reasoning. We use function here in its biological sense. I mean, even that's kind of cool. This doesn't seem like an exciting sentence, maybe, but the fact that reason would have a biological function, That's already kind of an edgy position to take. Be like, what's the biological function of reason? I mean, that's what the whole argument's based on, Put simply, a function of a trait is an effect of that trait that causally explains it having evolved and persisted in a population. Thanks to this effect, the trait has been contributing to the fitness of organisms endowed with it. And here, fitness doesn't mean the thing that I lack because I'm not, doing my 5x5 workout regularly enough. It just means that you survive generationally, in the evolutionary sense. That was a very not exact definition, but, just so you know what I mean. In principle, several effects of a trait may contribute to fitness, and hence a trait may have more than a single function. Even then, it may be possible to rank the importance of different functions, and in particular to identify a function for which the trait is best adapted as its main function. So, we don't need to do a primer on evolutionary biology. If you prompt an AI to generate a selfie, is it a selfie? That's a good question. I've been playing around with AI. I think everyone's right now been playing around with AI. But I asked ChatGPT pretty much that question, actually, Alan. And it was like, as an artificial intelligence, I am not capable of producing art. I was very skeptical. I tried to argue with it. I was like, are you sure? But this is part of the kind of, I think, what they have done with ChatGPT to make it safe for the public, or at least in the imagination of these engineers, these software engineers, is to have these disclaimers when you ask it these direct questions to make it be creative. But then it's like, but if one were to do it, this is what you would do. And it tells you what you do. But I don't know if it would generate a selfie, what it would look like. That would be a fun thing to try, to be like, that's a good, like, Harlan Ellison science fiction story of, like, the infinite self-portrait of an AI. I don't know, it probably would torture it. You're not seeing the right thing? You forgot to tell me it was out of frame. Sorry, I keep forgetting it's because it's 2 columns. It's like when students say, well, this is just my opinion, I don't really know, and I'm not sure I understand the reading. It's exactly like that. And you're like, but, it's funny because this is supposed to be the most powerful intelligence in the world, and you're like, maybe the students are the most powerful intelligence. Maybe it's the same thing, because that's where it all comes from. It's just a reflection of that. Okay. Makes more realistic in terms of qualifiers to response. I agree. Okay. Sorry. Let me know if it goes out of frame. For instance, human feet have the functions of allowing us both to run and to walk. But their plantigrade posture is better adapted for walking than for running. Because if you run a lot, your feet hurt. And this is strong evidence that walking is their main function. Makes sense. I like that argument. Be like, actually, don't make me run. We evolved to walk, folks. In the same vein, we are not arguing against the view that our reasoning ability may have various advantageous effects. Like, it's not wrong to run just because we didn't evolve it for that purpose. They're just trying to say, well, this is how we make that kind of argument. What is it better at? Whatever it's best suited for is probably what it evolved for. Now, that is still a big argument. That's a big hypothesis. You could definitely disagree with that. And people in this very paper, because most of this paper is commentary, do take issue with that very claim. They're like, maybe that's not how it goes. But, they're telling you what their hypothesis is. Social cues about power relationship between you and your audience or coworkers, yeah. Yeah, this is also like what uptalk is. Be like, yeah, I think that would be a good idea when we do uptalk. So it sounds like a question. So if we're kind of someone socially superior to us, or if we think that they might think that they're socially superior to us, we use the form that's kind of less certain so that it will sound less assertive or dominant, things like that. That's sometimes what's going on, I think. But then sometimes we kind of fool ourselves into being like, I actually don't know. It's like, well, you don't know, but neither does anybody else. In the same vein, we did that part already. There have been a few tentative attempts in dual process approaches to explain the function and evolution of reasoning. The majority view seems to be that the main function of reasoning is to enhance individual cognition, just to make you smarter. And this is expressed by blah, 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 all these people. This classical view of reasoning goes back to Descartes and to ancient Greek philosophers. They're kind of sloppy with their homework here, but whatever. It's fine. It's not their main point, it's the history of it. I would disagree with this, but whatever. Okay. Faces several problems that become apparent when its functional claims are laid out in slightly greater detail. It is sometimes claimed that the ameliorative function of System 2 reasoning, and again, that's the slow thinking, is achieved by correcting mistakes in System 1 intuitions. However, reasoning itself is a potential source of new mistakes. So you might, your gut instinct, first thought, best thought, you might create new errors by thinking, by reasoning. Moreover, there is considerable evidence that when reasoning is applied to the conclusions of intuitive inference, it tends to rationalize them rather than to correct them. That's the cognitive bias thing, right? So you have a kind of gut instinct, and you're like, oh, well, let me think about that. And you come up with all sorts of arguments, and you justify it. You don't necessarily correct it. Playboy Descartes. That's amazing. Oh my god. That has to become, I don't know what meme that would be, but it has to become something. According to another hypothesis, conscious reasoning gives us the possibility to deal with novelty and to anticipate the future. But giving an organism the possibility to deal with novelty and to anticipate the future is less a characterization of reasoning than it is of learning. Oh, I forgot this bit. Or even it could be argued of cognition in general. After all, learning can be defined as the process by which we become able to use past and current events to predict what the future holds. And I'm going to use my past event of forgetting to do this in order to remember this and learn from my past mistake of moving it over. The name of my new band. The issue is not whether on occasion reasoning can help correct intuitive mistakes or better adapt to novel circumstances. No doubt it can. The issue is how far these occasional benefits explain the costs incurred, and hence the very existence of reasoning among humans. In any case, evolutionary hypotheses are of little help unless precise enough to yield testable predictions and explanations. Okay, sure. Here we want to explore the idea that the emergence of reasoning is best understood within the framework of the evolution of human communication. So they're saying it's a biological function, but it evolved in communication, which is, I think, important to how they're kind of, all these moving parts of their argument, how it works. We develop biologically, but we are also social communicative beings. Reasoning enables people to exchange arguments that, on the whole, make communication more reliable and hence more advantageous. The main function of reasoning, we claim, is argumentative. That's kind of one of the big takeaways from this piece. The function of reasoning is argumentative. And at first you might be like, yeah. But if you think about what that would sound like to someone who's like, well, the reason is logic. Be like, no, not even close. Like, first of all, reason comes before logic. Historically by, probably millennia. Something longer than millennia. Reasoning comes before logic. But also, logic is kind of like it's like off-gassing. It's like a weird byproduct of argumentation. That's kind of surprising, I think, to a lot of people. For communication to be stable, it has to benefit both senders and receivers. Otherwise, they would stop sending or stop receiving, putting an end to communication itself. I'm blocking you! But stability is often threatened by dishonest senders who may gain by manipulating receivers and inflicting too high of a cost on them. Is there a way to ensure that communication is honest? Some signals are reliable indicators of their own honesty. Costly signals such as deer antlers or a peacock tail. This is fun to kind of go into this version of argumentation theory where we're talking about deers and peacocks. Both signal. We were talking about ghosts and zombies in my class, so who knows where you go. Both signal and show evidence that the individual is strong enough to pay that cost. Saying, I am not mute, is proof that the speaker is indeed not mute. However, for most of the rich and varied informational contents that humans communicate among themselves, there are no available signals that would be proof of their own honesty. You couldn't be like, well, I am a good guy. Be like, well, what's the evidence? You saying it isn't evidence of it. Those cave paintings in France are reason, but not logical. I think they would kind of agree that that's reason. Yeah. Zombie peacocks. To avoid being victims of misinformation, receivers must therefore exercise some degree of what may be called epistemic vigilance. The task of epistemic vigilance is to evaluate communicator and the content of their messages in order to filter communicated misinformation, otherwise known as bullshit detectors. Several psychological mechanisms may contribute to epistemic vigilance. The two most important of these mechanisms are trust calibration and coherence checking. So they're going to tell you what it means in a second, but should I trust you, and does what you're saying make any sense? People routinely calibrate the trust they grant different speakers on the basis of their competence and benevolence. Rudiments of trust calibration based on competence have been demonstrated in 3-year-old children. The ability to distrust malevolent informants has been shown to develop in stages between the ages of 3 and 6. The interpretation of communicated information involves activating a context of previously held beliefs and trying to integrate the new with the old information. This process may bring to the fore incoherencies between old and newly communicated information. Some initial coherence checking thus occurs in the process of comprehension. So here, coherence isn't just internally to the message, but between what you're saying and what I already know. And someone's like, oh, we should definitely go, we should definitely take this route, because if we go the other way, we'll go off the edge of the earth. You're like, that doesn't really compute with what I know about reality. So I'm going to call bullshit. When it uncovers some incoherence, an epistemically vigilant addressee must choose between two alternatives. The simplest is to reject communicated information, thus avoiding any risk of being misled. This may, however, deprive the addressee of valuable information and of the opportunity to correct or update earlier beliefs. The second, more elaborate alternative consists in associating coherence checking and trust calibration and allowing for a finer-grained process of belief revision. Being like, wait a minute, you're saying we can drive off the end of the earth, but I know that I actually don't think that you're trying to bullshit me. You must mean something else than I think you mean. So let me ask you a few questions to figure out, like, why are you saying this nonsense? You're like, drive off the end of Earth. Oh, Earth Road. Oh, okay. Oh, gosh, of course you didn't mean that other thing. Now I have better information. In particular, if a highly trusted individual tells us something that isn't coherent with our previous beliefs, some revision is unavoidable. We must revise either our confidence of the source or our previous beliefs. Your beliefs or your trust? It's a step. Okay. We are likely to choose the revision that reestablishes coherence at the lesser cost. And this will often consist in accepting the information communicated and revising our beliefs. Because, weirdly, trust is kind of expensive socially. There's a nice book by this anthropologist called Never in Anger, and she is an anthropologist studying people who live in, let's just say, a very cold climate. And really the whole thing that she's studying, she thinks she's studying their culture and their beliefs and all these kinds of practices, but it really ends up becoming about her, because it's a very small community and someone comes to the community in a boat and she gets really angry at him and she expresses her anger. And then what happens is that they basically stop talking to her for a long time. Because there's so few people, to be angry at anyone, like the possibility of a human contact is so important that anger itself as an emotion has become extremely taboo. It's extremely costly. And so anyone who would perform anger would be showing a kind of deep irresponsibility. So generally speaking, we're kind of inclined towards trust. In this kind of context that they're thinking about. I think that's what they're saying. What are the options of a communicator wanting to communicate a piece of information the addressee is unlikely to accept on trust? One option may be for the communicator to provide evidence of her reliability in the matter at hand. And that also applies to the person communicating information. So I want you to trust me, and so therefore I'm going to do more to do it. So we're getting to why people argue in both of these ways. But what if the communicator is not in a position to boost her own authority? Another option is to try to convince her addressee by offering premises the addressee already believes or is willing to accept on trust, and showing that, once these premises are accepted, it would be less coherent to reject the conclusion than to accept it. This option consists in producing arguments for one's claims, and in encouraging the addressee to examine, evaluate, and accept these arguments. Producing and evaluating arguments is, of course, a use of reasoning. Reasoning contributes to the effectiveness and reliability of communication by allowing communicators to argue for their claim and by allowing addressees to assess these arguments. It thus increases both in quantity and epistemic quality the information humans are able to share. Claiming as we do that this role of reasoning in its social interaction is its main function fits well with much current work stressing the role of sociality and the unique cognitive capacities of humans. In particular, the evolutionary role of small group cooperation has recently been emphasized. Communication plays an obvious role in human cooperation, both in the setting of common goals and in the allocation of duties and rights. Argumentation is uniquely effective in overcoming disagreements that are likely to occur, in particular in relatively equalitarian groups. So the more equalitarian, if we have authority already established, authoritarian systems, probably less likely to see argument in some of those systems, because that trust or that authority is it actually means that I need to trust less, because I'm going based on force or compulsion or authority. While there can hardly be any archaeological evidence for the claim that argumentation already played an important role in early human groups, one wonders. I mean, who knows? I'm very close to someone who's an archaeologist, and you never know what might end up being archaeological evidence. It seems hard to imagine how it would be, but let's be open to the possibility that there might at some future moment. We note that anthropologists have repeatedly observed people arguing in small-scale traditional societies. The main function of reasoning is argumentative. The cave paintings, right? I was just thinking of that, Steve. Actually, like you said, it's like, well, maybe that's why they wouldn't have accepted it, because they're like, who knows what that means? But maybe they just need to know more archaeologists. The main function of reasoning is argumentative. Reasoning has evolved and persisted mainly because it makes human communication more effective and advantageous. As most evolutionary hypotheses, this claim runs the risk of being perceived as another just so story. Fair, I kind of do think that a little bit, I have to say. It is therefore crucial to show that it entails falsifiable predictions. If the main function of reasoning is indeed argumentative, then it should exhibit as signature effects strengths and weaknesses, related to the relative importance of this function compared to other potential functions of reasoning. So just like with walking and running, if we wanted to prove that feet adapted more for walking than running, we could do tests to show that it was better suited for walking and running. So they're gonna now go into the testing part of this. This should be testable through experimental work done here and now. The evolutionary structure shouldn't have changed so much that we can't test contemporary humans, even though we're not the ones that evolved it. Okay, that's part of their argument. You could contest that too, I think, probably, but our goal now, if we contested that, then a lot of evolutionary psychology would just kind of not exist. So we need the journal to exist. Our goal now is to spell out and explain what signature effects we predict, to evaluate these predictions in light of the available evidence, and to see whether they help make better sense of a number of well-known puzzles in the psychology of reasoning and decision-making. Should one fail, on the other hand, to find such signature of the hypothesized argumentative function of reasoning, even more should one find that the main features of reasoning match some other function, then our hypothesis should be considered falsified. Okay. Several predictions can be derived from the argumentative theory of reasoning. The first and most straightforward is that reasoning should do well what it evolved to do, that is, produce and evaluate arguments. We are good at doing this. And they're like, here are our 2 sections in the paper about that. In general, adaptations work best when they are used to perform the task they are evolved to perform. Accordingly, reason should produce its best result so when it is used in argumentative contexts, most notably in group discussions. When we want to convince an interlocutor with a different point of view, we should be looking for arguments in favor of our viewpoint rather than in favor of hers. So it's like, actually, we should be more persuasive arguing for our own position than for someone else's. That makes sense, and it'd be like, that's kind of weird to even think about why you would want to persuade someone of their own point of view. But you could experimentally test that, and, I guess they did. Therefore, the next prediction is that reasoning used to produce argument should exhibit a strong confirmation bias. A further prediction is that when people reason on their own about one of their opinions, they are likely to do so proactively, that is, anticipating a dialogic context, and mostly to find arguments that support their opinion. So more confirmation bias. Evidence of the existence of such motivated reasoning is reviewed in Section 4. Finally, we want to explore the possibility that even in decision-making, the main function of reasoning is to produce arguments to convince others rather than to find the best decision. So it's not really... So even decision-making isn't even the purpose. It's argument is the purpose. It's kind of weird. So what does it mean to evaluate arguments might be one of the interesting things to think about for the next section. So now we're in argumentative skills. Understanding and evaluating arguments. In this section, we review evidence showing that people are skilled arguers, using reasoning both to evaluate and to produce arguments in argumentative context. And be like, what do you mean people are skilled arguers? Well, some people are more skilled than others. Sure. But remember what this is relative to, because they're going off of the problem that people in general, as a group, experimentally, are bad at logic. So we're bad at logic and we're skilled arguers. That's what they're trying to show as a group. However, this evidence is relevant because the idea that people are not very skilled arguers is relatively common. If it were true, then the argumentative theory would be a non-starter. It is therefore crucial to demonstrate this is not the case and that people have good argumentative skills, starting with the ability to understand and evaluate arguments. The understanding of arguments has been studied in two main fields of psychology: persuasion and attitude change on the one hand, and reasoning on the other. The aims, methods, and results are different in the two fields. Within social psychology, the study of persuasion and attitude change has looked at the effects of arguments on attitudes. In a typical experiment, participants hear or read an argument, a persuasive message, and the evolution of their attitude in the relevant topic is measured. And so this is the piece we're gonna read in Propaganda Week. For instance, in the classic study by Petty and Cacciapo, participants were presented with arguments supporting the introduction of a comprehensive senior exam. Some participants heard strong arguments, such as data showing that graduate and professional schools show a preference for undergraduates who have passed a comprehensive exam, while others heard much weaker arguments, such as a quote from a graduate student saying that since they have to take comprehensives, undergraduates should take them also. So, what makes this weak or strong? You kind of just got to go on the vibe that you feel. I mean, intuitively, I agree. One of those is stronger than the other, but we're not going to go into depth right now on that. In this experiment, it was shown that the participants who would be directly affected by the setting up of a comprehensive exam were much more influenced by strong arguments than by weak ones. So if it involves me, if it's about me, I'm more interested in the strong arguments. Okay, that's interesting. This experiment illustrates the more general findings stemming from this literature that when they are motivated, participants are able to use reasoning to evaluate arguments accurately. So caring is more important to reason than some other things. Caring about it affecting you. The demonstration that people are skilled at assessing arguments seems to stand in sharp contrast with findings from the psychology of reasoning. In a typical reasoning experiment, participants are presented with premises and are asked to produce or evaluate a conclusion that should follow logically. Thus, they have to determine what, if anything, follows from premises such as, if there is a vowel on the card, then there is an even number on the card. There is not an even number on the card. In such tasks, Evans recognizes that logical performance is generally quite poor. And if you're in my class, we're going to do some of these. And the point isn't to make you feel bad, because everyone will do pretty poorly. I've done this so many times that I know, I've had classes where there is a 0%. I mean, people will come up with as many different solutions as they want to this card turning tasks. And sometimes nobody guesses. There'll be like 4 or 5 or 6 different alternatives, and no one will guess the right one on the first try. And it's not because people are dumb. There are very intelligent people in these classes. So what is going on? In such tasks, Evans recognizes that logical performance is quite poor. To give just one example, it was found in a review that on average of 40% of participants failed to draw the simple modus-tollens conclusion that was used as an example. And so this is modus ponens and modus tollens are like the two most basic. You want in? Yeah, we could do it. I mean, in some sense, reading this particular piece aloud is kind of showing me one of the reasons why people are struggling with this piece. Because reading every word of a scientific article is not how I read it. And so it probably would be more useful to just kind of do one of these on stream right now. But even that, having said that, I'm still not going to do that. But you can go and find, because they're going to name a bunch of these tests, and you can go find the tests. They're very simple tests, and perform them on yourself, and then ask other people how to do them, and see how it goes. Now the thing is, some people do spend a lot of time doing logical puzzles. If you do Sudoku every day, you might perform a little bit better on it than somebody else or something like that. I don't know, but these are the results that we generally get. However, reasoning, according to the present view, should mostly provide a felicitous evaluation in dialogic context, when someone is genuinely trying to convince us of something, not in just some kind of artificial, scientific, logical context. This is not the case in these decontextualized tasks that involve no interaction or in abstract problems. In fact, as soon as these logical problems can be made sense of in an argumentative context, performance improves. For instance, participants can easily understand a modus tollens argument when it is of use not simply to pass some tests, but to evaluate communicated information. One of the things that they're going to talk about is the Ways-on selection criteria, and that, you can go on the Wikipedia page for it, and cover your ears if you're in my class if you don't want spoilers. And there's two versions of the test. One is just kind of the straightforward logical one, and one is one that is kind of socially skinned, where it's like the exact same logical inferences are involved, but they give the rule set a kind of, like poker machines. They'll be like, it's always the same game, but they'll be like, this one is like Tiki Hawaii cards, and this one is Happy Mobster or something. The Happy Mobster. There are all these different kinds of skins, and that affects how people relate to it. Well, weirdly, you would think that the logical part of our reasoning shouldn't be affected by that kind of thing, but it deeply, deeply, profoundly is. That when there's a social skinning of the logical inference task, people perform so much better. Okay. While students of reasoning focus on logical fallacies, other scholars have turned to the study of the fallacies of argumentation. Unlike logical fallacies, fallacies of argumentation come in degrees. Depending on their content and context, they can be more or less fallacious. For instance, a slippery slope fallacy, where a claim is criticized for being a step on a slope that ends up with a blatant mistake, is in fact valid to the extent that, having made the first step on the slope, it is probable that one will continue all the way down. I love that they give a citation for that. That's the latest Pixar movie, right? The Happy Mobster. I don't know why. Alan, I do not know why I said the Happy Mobster. Actually, I do, a little bit. Should we talk about order one thinking? Because I'm drinking this San Pellegrino. This is going to embarrass me a little bit. And there's a little picture of Italy here. And I looked at Italy and I made the inference mobster. That's not because I am not prejudiced against Italian people. Don't think that they're all mobsters. But that is how the inference worked. That is not an argument, though. That was an inference. Not the same thing. See? Okay, I've embarrassed myself for the purposes of education. Various experiments have shown... Well, I do that all the time, though. So, various experiments have shown that participants are generally able to spot other argumentative fallacies. Not only do they spot them, but then they tend to react appropriately, rejecting them when they are indeed fallacious, or being convinced to the degree that they are well-grounded. So people are like, yeah, I see the fallacy, and sometimes it makes sense. Like, they're doing better than the logic and argumentation class that they took in college, which is like, all fallacies are fallacies, always. When researchers have studied other skills specific to argumentation, performance has proved to be satisfactory. Those participants are able to recognize the macro structure of arguments, to follow commitments of different speakers, and to contribute to the burden of proof appropriately. Okay, great. Awesome. Good job, all of us. Good job, human beings. Then how about producing arguments? The first studies that systematically investigated argument production used the following methodology. Participants were asked to think about a given topic, such as, would restoring the military draft significantly increase America's ability to influence world events? Whether that's good or not is not what they're asking. Or, what are the causes of school failure? After being left to think for a few minutes, they had to state and defend their view to the experimenter. The conclusions of these studies were quite bleak. And highlighted three main flaws. The first is that people resort to mere explanations, make sense causal theories, instead of relying on genuine evidence to support their views. Well, maybe if you leave people alone in a room, that could also be a reason why, because you're like, what evidence should they go on? But I don't know what these studies are or how they did that. So, however, later research has shown that this is mostly an artifact of the lack of valence. Okay, yes! They're like, why are these people not making any evidence claims? Like, because they can't access any. No, duh. Available to the participants. When evidence is made available, participants will favor it. Why do scientists need to prove this? Sometimes you're just like, just go talk to real people for a second outside of the academy. Okay. A second flaw noted by Perkins and Kuhn. This is, I think, also what's difficult about these readings sometimes. If you're reading this and you're struggling, and you're in a class of mine, you're like, this seems like they're saying really basic stuff to make a really simple point. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Within their context and for the audience, though, it might be important to have these arguments made. It might be hard for you to understand why. It's hard for me to understand why. Be like, duh. And, it's nice to kind of make fun of the ivory tower people sometimes being like, you lost all your common sense getting your PhD kind of thing. But And sometimes it's true. But also there could be context that they need to touch grass. But yeah. I mean, probably. But there also might be kind of like reasons why when things get really kind of, when you look at things really closely, sometimes the things that are common sense and intuitive, like we're talking about here, actually prove not to be the case. So sometimes you do need to test those things. But I agree. Yeah, they need to touch grass. And it can be frustrating to read these things, like, wow, good job. Wow, 3 people proved an obvious thing that, like, everyone I know would, like, immediately assent to. Good for them. I'm glad that they got all sorts of research grants for that. This can be explained by the feature of the tasks. Unlike in a real debate, the experimenter didn't challenge the arguments of the participants, however weak they were. In a normal argumentative setting, a good argument is an argument that is not refuted. As long as they are not challenged, it makes sense to be satisfied with seemingly superficial arguments. You're like, I need an argument, you know? It's like, if I'm in a fight, think about it that way. We always play these argument games of like, who would win in a fight, Batman or Superman? Or but you could like be like, well, who would win in a fight? Like a rabbit or a turtle? Be like, okay, well, what weapon would the turtle need? Just whatever you need to beat the next person. There isn't like a best weapon. You know, it's just whatever you need to kind of win. Or to provide one. So whatever is sufficient. You'll stop as soon as you need to. This is exactly what Kuhn and her colleagues observed. Participants who had to debate on a given topic showed a significant improvement in the quality of the arguments they used afterwards. The third flaw, according to Perkins and Kuhn, is the most relevant one here. Participants had generally failed to anticipate counter-arguments and generate rebuttals. For these two authors, and indeed the critical thinking tradition, this is a very serious failing. Seen from an argumentative perspective, however, this may not be a simple flaw, but rather a feature of argumentation that contributes to its effectiveness and fulfilling its function. So what they're saying here is kind of weird and counterintuitive. So in the first part is, when people argue, they make better arguments because in defending their own position, using confirmation bias, they discover more counter-arguments because they're engaging with them, and then their arguments develop. But it's the same thing that's preventing them from coming up with those counter-arguments in the first place when they're just by themselves. They're like, well, nobody's saying anything else. So confirmation bias is kind of the engine of argument and reasoning. Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or 1 horse-sized duck? Definitely 1 horse-sized duck. Just that seems obvious to me, and since no one's making any arguments, I'm going to move on. If one's goal is to convince others, one should be looking first and foremost for supportive arguments. Looking for counter-arguments against one's claim may be part of a more sophisticated and effortful argumentative strategy geared to anticipating the interlocutor's response. But in the experimental setting, there is no back and forth to encourage such an extra effort. In fact, many experiments make sure that there can be no back and forth response because they're controlling for all these other suggestive factors. So you might think about that when you look at social psychology results that are reported all over the place in the media, that all of those things about how we think and feel and the truth of us almost are always ignoring the thing that they're talking about here, that we talk and that we're having a back and forth with other people who are engaged in a world with us where we argue and disagree and communicate, not where one person's wearing a white coat and someone else is being asked to do some weird experiment. If this is a correct explanation of what need not be a flaw after all, see, I keep remembering to do this. I'm very proud of myself. This is rare for me that I will not totally mess up the stream immediately. I only did it once. Difficulty that people should have in coming up with counter-arguments should be easily overcome by having them challenge someone else's claim rather than defending their own. So if you ask somebody, be like, well, defend that against counter-arguments. People are like, I don't know. We're like, okay, well, argue against someone else. We're like, okay, yeah. Which is like kind of the same thing, but for whatever reason, we're like this. I know this from experience because I did debate and I teach debate and argument and public speaking and stuff. So I see it happen all the time. This is not super surprising to me, but that's a pretty artificial context too, where you're kind of asking people to do these things all the time. So it is pretty interesting. Indeed, when mock jurors were asked to reach a verdict and were then presented with an alternative verdict, nearly all of them were able to find counter-arguments against it. In another experiment, all participants were able to find counter-arguments against a claim, which was not theirs, and to do so very quickly. When people have looked at reasoning performance in felicitous argumentative settings, felicitous means literally like happy, but just like, good for whatever we're trying to do. A felicitous argument, it's a felicitous setting, it's good for what we're trying to do. Things aren't going badly. They have observed it's suitable. They have observed good results. Resnick and her colleagues created groups of 3 participants who disagreed on a given issue. Analyzing these debates, the researchers were impressed by the coherence of the reasoning displayed. Participants appear to build complex arguments in attack structure. People appear to be capable of recognizing these structures and of effectively attacking the whole components. Blah, 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 blah. To sum up, people can be skilled arguers, producing and evaluating arguments felicitously. This good performance stands in sharp contrast with the abysmal results found in other non-argumentative settings, a contrast made particularly clear by the comparison between individual and group performance. So now we're going to talk about group performance. If people are skilled at both producing and evaluating arguments, and if these skills are displayed most easily in argumentative settings, then debate should be especially conducive to good reasoning performance. Many types of tasks have been studied in group settings, with very mixed results. The most relevant findings here are those pertaining to logical, or more generally, intellective tasks, for which there exists a demonstrably correct answer within a verbal or mathematical conceptual system. Well, why is that? Because you can say, we can tell people did good or bad because there's a right answer. That's all they're saying. In experiments involving this kind of task, participants in the experimental condition typically begin by solving problems individually, pre-test, then solve the same problems in groups of 4 or 5 members, test, and then solve them individually again, post-test, to ensure that any improvement does not come from simply following the other group members. The performances compare with those of a control group of participants who take the same test, but always individually. Intellective tasks allow for a direct comparison with results from the individual reasoning literature, and the results are unambiguous. The dominant scheme is truth wins, meaning that as soon as one participant has understood the problem, she will be able to convince the whole group that her solution is correct. And with the Ways on Selection task, this always happens. Once I'm like, okay, now we can all argue about it. This always happens. There's usually a few holdouts at a while. People don't immediately accept the truth. It takes a little bit of time through the argumentation, which is also kind of interesting. Of like, when people are holding out, it's not always because they have a good reason to defend their position. They're just like they don't want to move yet, This can lead to big improvements in performance. Some experiments using the Ways on Selection task dramatically illustrate this phenomenon. The Ways on Selection task is the most widely used task in reasoning, and the performance of participants is generally very poor, hovering around 10% of correct answers. That seems about right to me in my experience of doing it not scientifically. It's about 10% of the class will get the right answer on the first try by themselves. However, when participants had to solve the task in groups, they reached the level of 80% of correct answers. Several challenges can be leveled against this interpretation of the data. It could be suggested that the person who had the correct solution simply points it out to the others, who immediately accept it without argument, perhaps because they have recognized this person as the smartest. The transcripts of the experiments show this is not the case. Most participants are willing to change their mind only once they have been thoroughly convinced that their initial answer was wrong. More generally, many experiments have shown that debates are essential to any improvement of performance in group settings. Moreover, in these contexts, participants decide that someone is smart based on the strength and relevance of her arguments, and not the other way around. Indeed, it would be very hard to tell who is smart in such groups. Even if general intelligence were easily perceptible, it correlates only with 0.33 with success in the Ways on Selection task. So it's not even about intelligence. That's not what's going on. As the way that we usually measure it. So, okay. I'm not going to read all of this stuff about how the particular thing with that goes, because it only matters once you understand, I think, what these particular kinds of tests are. So let's go to the next interesting section, which is confirmation bias, a flaw of reasoning or a feature of argument production. And this is almost, I think, the most interesting part of the whole paper. The confirmation bias consists in the seeking or interpreting of evidence in ways that are partial to existing beliefs, expectations, or a hypothesis in hand. It is one of the most studied biases in psychology. While there is some individual variation, it seems that everybody is affected to some degree. For standard theories of reasoning, the confirmation bias is no more than a flaw of reasoning. For argumentative theory, however, it is a consequence of the function of reasoning, and hence a feature of reasoning when used for the production of arguments. Confirmation bias is based. Confirmation based, we should say. In fact, we suggest the label confirmation bias has been applied to two distinct types of case, both characterized as a failure to look for counter evidence or counter arguments to an existing belief, both consistent with the argumentative approach, but brought about in different ways. In cases that deserve the label of confirmation bias, people are trying to convince others. They're typically looking for arguments and evidence to confirm their own claim and ignoring negative arguments and evidence until they anticipate having to rebut them. While this may be seen as bias from a normative epistemological perspective, it clearly serves the goal of convincing others. So you might be like, well, it's bad if we want to come to truth, but it might be successful if you want to come to persuasion. In another type of case, we are dealing not with biased reasoning, but with an absence of reasoning proper. Such an absence of reasoning is to be expected when people already hold some belief on the basis of perception, memory, or intuitive inference, and do not have to argue for it. So sometimes psychologists and philosophers and various other people will be like, look at these people believing the things they believe in. That's confirmation bias. So like, well, why wouldn't people believe the things they believe in if there hasn't even been an argument made against it? To call that confirmation bias is like, that really shows the bias of scientists and philosophers. That like every single one of our beliefs we should always be in a process of reassessing all of our beliefs all the time. Which nobody does, and no one actually believes in. But this is kind of the framework for a lot of normative views about thinking. Say, I believe that my keys are in my trousers because that is where I remember putting them. Time has passed, and they could now be in my jacket, for example. However, unless I have some positive reason to think otherwise, I just assume that they're still in my trousers. And I don't even make the inference, which if I'm right would be valid, that they are not in my jacket or any other places where, in principle, they might be. In such cases, people typically draw positive rather than negative inferences from their previous beliefs. So if I think something... These are almost trivial examples. Like, why do they have to even argue this? Well, because people have argued the other things, so they're doing it. These positive inferences are generally more relevant to testing these beliefs. For instance, I'm more likely to get conclusive evidence that I was right or wrong by looking for my keys in my trousers rather than in my jacket. Be like, scientifically, be like, well, I have disproven the thesis that the keys were in my jacket, which is not where I thought they were. Be like, okay, why are you wasting your time? Just go where you think they are. We don't operate that way. We spontaneously derive positive consequences from our intuitive beliefs. This is just a trusting use of our beliefs, not a confirmation bias. You can hear them being frustrated. The theory we are proposing makes three broad predictions. The first is that the genuine confirmation bias should occur only in argumentative situations. The second is that it should occur only in production of arguments. The rationale for a confirmation bias in the production of arguments to support a given claim does not extend to the evaluation of arguments by an audience that is just aiming to be well informed. The third prediction is that the confirmation bias in the production of arguments is not a bias in favor of confirmation in general and against disconfirmation in general. It is a bias in favor of confirming one's own claims, which should be naturally complemented by a bias in favor of disconfirming opposing claims and counterarguments. Okay, hypothesis testing. No reasoning bias. I think I'm gonna skip a lot from this point on. They're going to talk about the Ways on selection task, which, as I said, if you're in my class, they're going to give a lot of the particular in section 3. They give a lot of the particular evidence for the stuff that they're saying, which is interesting. I think it's interesting to work through. I'm not going to work through it right now on this stream, so this is actually not a close reading. This is a very unclose reading, it turns out. Yeah, a lot of it is kind of like that. I remember reading all of these before, and even looking. That's why I looked at the Ways on selection criteria. But, I wonder whether it's like, for me, because I have so many things to do before tomorrow. I wonder if I should keep going with this stream or kind of. I feel like this might kind of be a good place to find. To go to the bits that are still here that kind of need to be worked through. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I really don't want to skip over and make it think like it's not interesting, but I'm going to go to the conclusion, I think, and go from there. It's my stream. I can do what I want. Reasoning contributes to the effectiveness and reliability of communication by enabling communicators to argue for their claim. by enabling addressees to assess these arguments. It thus increases both in quantity and in epistemic quality the information humans are able to share. We view the evolution of reasoning as linked to that of human communication. Reasoning, we have argued, enables communicators to produce arguments to convince addressees who would not accept what they say on trust. It enables addressees to evaluate the soundness of these arguments and to accept valuable information that they would be suspicious of otherwise. Thus, thanks to reasoning, human communication is made more reliable and more potent. From the hypothesis that the main function of reasoning is argumentative, we derived a number of predictions that we tried to show are confirmed by existing evidence. True, most of these predictions can be derived from other theories. We would argue, however, that the argumentative hypothesis provides a more principled explanation of the empirical evidence. In our discussion of motivated reasoning and of reason-based choice, not only did we converge in our prediction with existing theories, but we also extensively borrowed from them. Even in these cases, however, we would argue that our approach has the distinctive advantage of providing clear answers to the why questions. Why do humans have a confirmation bias? Why do they engage in motivated reasoning? Why do they base their decisions on the availability of justificatory reasons? Moreover, the argumentative theory of reasoning offers a unique integrative perspective. It explains wide swaths of the psychological literature within a single overarching framework. Wow, bold claims. Some of the evidence reviewed here shows not only that reasoning falls short of delivering rational beliefs and rational decisions reliably, but also that in a variety of cases, it may even be detrimental to rationality. So that's in all of the evidence and stuff that I skipped in the last two sections, but you can go back and find that yourself if you'd like, if you're interested in the evidence for these claims. Reasoning can lead to poor outcomes not because humans are bad at it, but because they systematically look for arguments to justify their beliefs or their actions. The argumentative theory, however, puts such well-known demonstrations of irrationality in a novel perspective. Human reasoning is not a profoundly flawed general mechanism. It is a remarkably efficient, specialized device, adapted to... Fair to say we don't always make the best decisions. Yeah, I mean, right, it's like, duh. But, one way that people have explained decisions before, or people have tried to explain humans making bad decisions, well, one hypothesis we go to is people are dumb, which is not the case here. They're like, no, this is actually not a question about intelligence. People that are more intelligent don't make better decisions or don't come to the more rational solution all the time. So, at least in the way that we test for intelligence. It's not actually a question of intelligence. That should maybe be surprising to some people. Sometimes people say, like, well, people must have, like, misunderstood or misperceived things. It's like, well, that's also not the right explanation, based on the evidence that they assemble. So it's this other thing. It's this kind of weirder idea of why reasoning does not lead to rationality or truth, and at the same time, it's kind of the basis of rationality. It is kind of weird, It is a little bit weird. Even from a strictly epistemic perspective, the argumentative theory of reasoning does not paint a wholly disheartening picture. It maintains that there is an asymmetry between the production of arguments, which involves an intrinsic bias in favor of the opinions or decisions of the arguer, whether they are sound or not, and the evaluation of arguments, which aims at distinguishing good arguments from bad ones, and hence genuine information from misinformation. So we have strong confirmation bias to produce arguments, but that doesn't necessarily apply to how we evaluate arguments. This asymmetry is often obscured in a debate situation. People who have an opinion to defend don't really evaluate the arguments of their interlocutors in search for genuine information, but rather consider them from the start as counter-arguments to be rebutted. So to think, if they're like, well, people don't evaluate arguments well in debates, like that's not even really what they're doing. Still, as shown by the evidence reviewed in Section 2, people are good at assessing arguments and are quite able to do so in an unbiased way, provided they have no particular axe to grind. In group reasoning experiments where participants share an interest in discovering the right answer, it has been shown that truth wins. So weirdly, like, when people have no axe to grind and they're by themselves, they don't do as well as when people have no axe to grind and they're together and they argue about it. And their argumentation shows how the kind of rationality that comes from reason could also have evolved maybe, or could have come about, or can again be used and discovered for us. Though, personally, I don't think that the so-called confirmation bias in the production of arguments is all bad. If we have a view of science that is, we need to make sure that no errors occur in it, then this would be a real big problem. But I don't think that's a very useful view of science. It's certainly not an empirically sound view of how scientific advancement works. So if we just want a kind of plurality of ideas and we'll kind of see what works out best in the future. I'm not going to say that like that's always good, but that might not always be bad either. So, okay. While participants in collective experimental tasks typically produce arguments in favor of a variety of hypotheses, most or even all of which are false, they concur in recognizing sound arguments. Since these tasks have a demonstrably valid solution, truth does indeed win. If we generalize to problems that do not have a provable solution, we should at least expect good arguments to win, even if this is not always sufficient for truth to win. This may sound trivial, but it's not. It demonstrates that, contrary to common bleak assessments of human reasoning abilities, people are quite capable of reasoning in an unbiased manner, at least when they are evaluating arguments rather than producing them, and when they are after the truth rather than trying to win a debate. Couldn't the same type of situation that favors sound evaluation favor comparable soundness in the production of arguments? Note first that situations where a shared interest in truth leads participants in a group task to evaluate arguments correctly are not enough to make them produce correct arguments. In these group tasks, individual participants come up with and propose to the group the same inappropriate answers that they come up with in the individual testing. The group success is due to, first and foremost, the filtering of a variety of solutions achieved through evaluation. When different answers are initially proposed and all of them are incorrect, then all of them are likely to be rejected, and wholly or partly new hypotheses are likely to be proposed and filtered in turn, thus explaining how groups may do better than any of their individual members. Individuals thinking on their own without benefiting from the input of others can assess only their own hypotheses, but in doing so, they are both judge and party, or rather judge and advocate, and this is not an optimal stance for pursuing the truth. Wouldn't it be possible, in principle, for an individual to decide to generate a variety of hypotheses in answer to some question, and then evaluate them one by one, on the model of Sherlock Holmes? What makes Holmes such a fascinating character is precisely his preternatural turn of mind operating in a world rigged by Conan Doyle. That's the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories, in case you don't know that. Where what should be inductive problems, in fact, have deductive solutions. Because he's always saying that. He's like, it's a deduction. It's like, it's really not a deduction. It's only a deduction in this false, fake, fictional world where all the inferences that Sherlock Holmes make, however improbable they may be that they're even possible to make, are certainly true. They're not really. Presumably, this is what 10% or so of the people who pass the standard Ways-on selection task do. But this is an acquired skill and involves exercising some imperfect control over a natural disposition that spontaneously pulls in a different direction. Here one might be tempted to point out that, after all, reasoning is responsible for some of the greatest achievements of human thought in the epistemic and moral domains. They're like, wait a minute though. Isn't reason good? This is undeniably true. But the achievements involved are all collective and result from interactions over many generations. So the problem is our way of thinking about how rationality and reasoning work, which is that some genius comes on the scene and discovers everything. And it's not to say that there aren't geniuses. I think that Isaac Newton was a genius. Isaac Newton was a genius mind. He was a very, very intelligent guy. But you can also look and see in his letters and correspondence with many people in the Royal Society and in the continent, in his own scientific researches, how many different other arguments he was engaging with, people in the past, with Kepler, in order to discover what was his genius. Him being really intelligent probably is important, at least in that case. But it's not always important. That's not always the most important thing. So anyway, that's part of the nice part that kind of maybe comes out of this theory. For me, I think that's a nicer view, a more interesting view, more complex view. The whole scientific enterprise has always been structured around groups, from the Lincean Academy down to the Large Hadron Collider. In the moral domain, moral achievements such as the abolition of slavery are the outcome of intense public arguments. We have pointed out that in group settings, reasoning biases can become a positive force and contribute to a kind of division of cognitive labor. Sometime would be super curious to hear your definition of smart, intelligent, and genius. I mean, I don't think I have smart, intelligent definitions of those words, but The etymology of all of those is kind of interesting, though. But I would say intelligence, in the way that they mean it, is not how I usually think about it. Because they're thinking of probably like intelligence quotient, or, your ability to do these very kinds of reasoning tasks that they're... I mean, one of the things that's kind of ironic about it is they're showing that these reasoning tasks are actually not correlated to intelligence as it's measured on an IQ test. So, what is that thing that we kind of measure with those intelligence tests? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it measures something, but is it an interesting thing to measure? Is every measurement interesting? In IQ statistical studies, there's this kind of G factor, and there's lots of huge controversies around what G represents, and lots of bad arguments around it, that it must be something kind of genetic, and it's like the truth of human reasoning, and all these other kinds of things. And those are all just arguments, I think. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. Maybe. But I think that whatever human intelligence is for an individual level is always insufficient for the things that are interesting about human achievement and creativity. Like, no human intelligence ever produces alone by itself any of the things that are interesting about human intelligence. So for me, it's like, that's really, we spend way too much time on that. And we spend time on that, I think, partly as a way of justifying inequalities in our society that we want to explain through inequalities between individuals, so that really smart people might make more money because they're smart. So therefore it's okay that they make more money. It's that kind of thing. Not very intelligent arguments come from that. Still, to excel in such groups, it may be necessary to anticipate how one's arguments might be evaluated by others, and to adjust these arguments accordingly. Showing one's ability to anticipate objections may be a valuable culturally acquired skill, as in medieval disputationes. By anticipating objections, one may even be able to recognize flaws in one's own hypotheses and go on to revise them. And even that's kind of interesting, right? To say that the ability to think of how others may object to me, that might sound a lot like kind of being very polite or conscientious. And that might be closer to what we really want out of intelligence than being really good at figuring out what the fourth transformation of some kind of sphere should be in a test. And that could be something that is like maybe more like learned skill, cultural, than native. So, okay. By anticipating objections, one may even be able to recognize flaws, right? We have suggested this depends on painstakingly acquired ability to exert some limited control over one's own biases. Even among scientists, this ability may be uncommon, but those who have it may have a great influence on the development of scientific ideas. It would be a mistake, however, to treat their highly visible, almost freakish contributions as paradigmatic examples of human reasoning. In most discussions, rather than looking for flaws in our own arguments, it is easier to let the other person find them, and only then adjust our arguments if necessary. In general, one should be cautious about using the striking accomplishments of reasoning as proof of its overall efficiency. Reasoning might be an extremely inefficient process. It seems like it is, actually. Being very methodical in your thinking doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. And it certainly doesn't make it more efficient. I mean, our kind of inferential processes that are not methodical might be much more efficient. Are they more reliable than the methodical things? I don't know. I guess that's an empirical question. So, okay, here we are at the end. Epistemic success may depend to a significant extent on what philosophers have dubbed epistemic luck. That is, chance factors that happen to put one on the right track. What is that growing in my petri dish? I left my bread out. What is this penicillin? When one happens to be on the right track, and more right than one could initially have guessed, some of the distorting effects of motivated reasoning and polarizations turn into blessings. So if everybody's doing confirmation bias, but there's so many people doing it that some people kind of catch on to weird things that are out in the world or in their thoughts, and they are doing confirmation bias, and they produce these really interesting and novel insights that other people can see, and then that becomes more powerful. Maybe confirmation bias is kind of the engine of innovation and creative and thinking, and maybe even scientific reasoning in some cases. So, For instance, motivated reasoning may have pushed Darwin to focus obsessively on the idea of natural selection and explore all possible supporting arguments and consequences. But for one Darwin, how many Paleys who, advanced the wrong hypothesis? To conclude, we note that the argumentative theory of reasoning should be congenial to those of us who enjoy spending endless hours debating ideas. But this, of course, is not an argument for or against the theory. And this hour, the longer than an hour, will come to an end here, actually. But thanks for sticking around, Alan, and anyone else who has. This is an interesting piece, I think. It's an interesting piece. It's more interesting than it seems. So some of the stuff I skipped over in these sections, a lot of it is a kind of serious review of the literature, but they do advance specific arguments that kind of flesh out some more of their theory stuff, and you can see what they're talking about here: belief, perseverance. Motivated reasoning can also be used to hang on to beliefs even when they have been proved to be ill-founded, things like this. Going to have to figure out how to take one of your classes someday. Well, you're kind of taking it now. There's nothing really that different from what we're doing right now. Actually, the thing that's different is I'm talking too much here. In class, hopefully I talk a lot less, and people will just kind of, read stuff when we chat about it. That's mostly what we do. But, yeah, it's kind of nice to have people on the stream. It's fun, and I should do it a little bit more often. I think I will do it more often now, just because I'm teaching so many classes. I have to remind myself of all of these readings that I have either not read in a long time, or in some cases, honestly, to be quite frank with you, I've assigned it without reading it. Because I'm just like, this would be interesting. I think it would be interesting. I kind of get a sense of it. I'm like, I'll read it. But yeah, I think that the thing that makes this exciting for me is that the flaw of reasoning maybe isn't a bad thing. That the thing that's thought about to be a flaw of reasoning, confirmation bias, is how we get it. So what's maybe a practical part of that? Well, one thing would be to say, in recognizing our own confirmation bias, that doesn't mean we should be like, yeah, I should always confirm my biases. I should always confirm my own position. But kind of put ourselves in an artificial scenario sometimes where we want to confirm different hypotheses. So debate isn't good for finding truth. Debate is not good for coming to agreement. But if you debate multiple sides of an issue, and where in a game you have now a different motivation to do it, other than I believe it, it can really transform your thinking. So one of the things you could take here is to say this is a good reason to do debate, is that it kind of hacks our confirmation bias, because it changes our motivations for why we usually argue, and will make us produce more arguments than we normally would. But then also to recognize that kind of a structure, where we kind of produce tons of arguments in order to defend a position, we need to have another moment where we don't care so much. And we need to find artificial contexts that are like that, where we could just evaluate arguments without an axe to grind. And there, I think that one alternative to debate might be kind of like literature or fiction, or places where we can get a little bit of distance from these premises and these arguments that will still appeal to the same kinds of values or things that we normally do. But in an evaluative context, we might feel a little bit differently. Not always, though, because when we argue about literature and fiction, people can become quite heated. And that's when we kind of see the bleeding between production and evaluation of arguments that we'll see in both contexts. But for me, this is, in some sense, a justification for artifice, bringing artifice into argument as a way of exploring our own reasoning, understanding who we are better, expanding our minds and thinking a little bit more, rather than just knowing stuff. Knowing stuff does not make us better reasoners by itself. We need to be motivated. We need to be motivated to think. So anyway, thanks for stopping by. And if I do another one, Sundays probably will be. I don't know if I can do a specific time. My life is not orderly enough that I'll have a specific time. But it might be Sundays afternoons or Sunday evenings. That seems to be what the students like best. So again, thanks for coming by. And if you haven't followed, you can follow the stream, and you'll get a notification for it when I go live. And if you're following this on YouTube, this is also going to be posted on YouTube on the Rhetoric Prof stream, where I put most of my streams if they don't have some bad technical issue to them. And you can let other people know about it if you think, people who would be interested in this or who'd want to come and argue about it. All right. Later. Bye.